Interviews with top newsmakers, leaders, and interesting people. This is Talk of the Tiers.
Welcome to Talk of the Tiers. Thank you for being here. We're here every Sunday morning at 10 right after Meet the Press. I have somebody that we're interviewing today that I've been looking forward to talking to. Her name is Marley Hornick, and she is the CEO of the United Sovereign Americans. Marley, thank you for being here. The first thing I have to do is I have to ask you the same thing I ask every guest to verify you and I have not discussed these questions, and you'll be hearing them for the first time as I ask them of you.
That's correct, James. Nice to meet you. And no, I don't know any of the questions you're going to ask me.
Great. Okay, so how long have you been associated with the organization? You're the CEO now. Did you come up through the ranks, or you actually are the founder too? Isn't that correct?
That's correct. Myself and a cybersecurity and cyber infrastructure expert, Harry Howery, founded USA in July of 2023.
I think we should get this out of the way. Your organization is not affiliated in any way with another organization called United Sovereign Citizens or Sovereign Citizens. Your mission is completely different, and one that honestly I think most Americans should be able to support. You're all about ensuring the integrity of voting and making sure that we don't have judicial overreach, among other things. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. Yeah, we have absolutely nothing to do with the so-called sovereign citizen movement. In fact, USA, all of our volunteers, all of our attorneys, everyone who works with USA is a very dedicated American citizen and seeks to uphold the fundamental principle that the people of the several states, as it's said in the Constitution, are the ones who choose our representatives. And like you said, it's not judges. It's not election officials. It's a process that's fairly conducted and can be proven to be so.
Yeah, your mission statement on your website says you want to make sure that votes are cast, counted, and protected the way the law states they should be. I don't understand why anybody would have a problem with that, but there have been people who've taken you to task for that.
Yeah, there have been, including the Attorney General of New York State. She wasn't too pleased when my former organization, of which I'm still the executive director, submitted a formal suspicious activity report, suspected illegal registration and voting in New York's 2022 midterm to the Division of Election Law Enforcement, demonstrating that the amount of inaccuracy for unknown reasons in that election could have actually overturned her results.
You are also following one out of Colorado, I believe, where I don't remember exactly. It was in my questions down the line, but you said this, so I want to ask it now, where a woman actually went to prison or to jail because she was guarding ballots the way the law dictated that they be guarded. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what your involvement in that is?
Yeah, well, that's a really terrible circumstance, a stain on our American system of fairness and justice, where the Mesa County clerk during the 2020 election, Tina Peters, was told that her system, her entire server, was going to be updated only days after that election was administered. And in accordance with federal law and according to her duties, she had a server image captured before the update, because as most human beings now realize, every time there is an IT update, something breaks. And you have to figure out the system all over again. So she was just doing her job under federal law, which requires all records to be preserved for 22 months after an election. This caused quite a stir at the state government, and ultimately she reacted to the stir by trying to gather further evidence and secure further evidence of potential wrongdoing that was discovered in that server image. And again, what's the ultimate result? Well, the people who are responsible in Colorado, the Secretary of State and the Attorney General, for protecting the voting rights of all Colorado citizens by adhering to federal and state laws during the administration of an election, they went on the warpath against Tina, and they ended up actually securing her prosecution. She is a Gold Star mother, a tremendous patriot, and a whistleblower who is now in prison at the tender age of 76 or 77, looking at the rest of an 8-year sentence ahead of her. And it's actually really a travesty. And one of the things, yes, one of the things that Unite for Freedom is absolutely focused on is getting Tina Peters out of prison. It is a complete injustice. She did what she was supposed to do for the American people, and the election officials in Colorado, just like the election officials in New York, are provably not doing their job correctly. Their own records demonstrate it, and it's absolutely abominable that they're abusing state power and going on the warpath against people trying to do the right thing. Why would they do that?
That is a question I'm sure a lot of people are asking. All right, we'll be back in 2 minutes with more Talk of the Tears. I hope you'll stick around. Welcome back to Talk of the Tears. My guest again this week, Marley Hornick, the CEO of United Sovereign Americans. Marley, over the course of the last 8 years, both Republicans and Democrats have claimed, depending on the time that suited them, that there's massive voter fraud in the United States. Without taking either side, do you agree with that statement?
There are massive election irregularities inside of the official certified results of federal elections in every state United Sovereign Americans has audited, which is over 30 states at this point. Some states are significantly worse proportionally than others, just to be clear, New York among them. But every state has issues where the registration records, the votes ascribed to them, and the counts cannot be proven authentic. The eligibility requirements under federal and state laws are ignored. I'll give you an example. In New York, there are 1.6 million people registered to vote whose registrations are purged with no purge date, and they all have votes counted. When a registration record is purged with no purge date, no human being alive has the eyes necessary to see whether or not the votes were counted before or after the purge. That's why it's illegal. It is statutorily barred. So that is one example. And then you have hundreds of thousands of those people casting votes over the cycles over 2020, 2022, and 2024. How is that happening? How are purged voters voting at all? So that is an example of the kinds of massive irregularities inside of official election records USA constantly uncovers. And when we bring these to election officials, they are just so confident. Just by looking at a sheet of paper with a set of numbers on it, they say, well, oh, we know exactly why every one of those things happened. And there's no such thing as election fraud. And by the way, the Titanic could never sink.
That's true. So let's talk about provisional ballots for a minute. Some states are using them. California, I'm sure New York will soon, because everything California does, New York does later. You can, in the state of California and in some other states now, you can just show up to vote. You don't have to be registered. You don't have to prove your citizenship. You don't have to do anything. You can just show up to vote, and then the registrar of voters in that state, they're supposed to verify that you really were eligible to vote. That seems like a process that could be rife and easy to err.
Well, that's an interesting point you make, because when we ran a deep dive on the Orange County 2024 voter population, we discovered that 74,000 of the voters who voted and had their votes counted by that ROV, Bob Page, don't exist. They cannot be found in any reasonable fraud prevention or identity verification commercial tool. They don't have an address. They don't have a name. They don't have a social security number. They don't have anything. The registration record in the voter roll list is false. And 74,000 of them voted and had their votes counted. What is the impact for everyone across the country? Well, Orange County, California chose 6 members of the House of Representatives in our federal government this year. For real.
74,000. United Sovereign Americans acts to secure the blessing of liberty for all Americans and future generations by ensuring accountable government, thereby protecting our inalienable rights and the rule of law. That's on your website. What could, to me, that just sounds like a statement that all Americans should say, yeah, I want my country to focus well. I mean, why would there be any pushback on that?
I guess because it's the same reason that there's always been pushback on fairness in elections, which is some people would like to win at all costs. Some people would like to secure a private benefit against what is supposed to be the right of all American citizens who are qualified under applicable state law to choose representatives. That's the only logical reason. They're making money, they're getting a deal out of it, or they just really have they're just that arrogant, right? That they don't believe in the Declaration of Independence. They don't believe that every single American citizen is of equal value in the eyes of our Creator.
Now,
And so they cheat.
let me ask you this. When you find a fraudulent vote, I'm assuming, or I'm going to ask you, you don't care really what party or what candidate that was cast for. You just want to make sure that somebody has the right to vote. I mean, somebody has been certified, has been registered, has the right to vote.
Right. Well, to be clear, I'm not capable, and USA isn't capable of identifying which votes are fraud. Here's the argument, basically. The registration rolls contain the voter participation history that is maintained by the state election officials on behalf of the state and federal governments. Because when you have to really wrap your head around this, each state has one chief election official. When that person signs their signature certifying the returns of a mixed election, a federal and state election, they are simultaneously, with the stroke of a pen, authorizing the entire state government and all of the federal representatives from that state. And they better be sure. So when we go into their official records and we discover things like people who were registered to vote before they were born voting for Congress, or we discover backdated registrations voting for members of Congress, we can say, well, we don't really, that's an inconclusive circumstance. Maybe they have a reason that happened and maybe they don't. But when they count the vote and certify that election as accurate, they are lying.
Okay, we'll be back in 2 minutes with more Talk of the Tiers. I hope you'll stick around. Welcome back to Talk of the Tiers. I'm speaking with CEO of the United Sovereign Americans, Marley Hornick. Marley, another thing from your website I found interesting. It says, the Patriots from 1776 fought for freedom and self-governments not to be ruled by unelected judges. And I know it's not just voter integrity, you also work with judicial integrity. Can you elaborate on that statement a little bit?
Well, judicial integrity overlaps with voting integrity at the current time because our elections are being conducted so poorly that a lot of them end up in court. That's not how they're designed to operate. Just to be clear, they're supposed to be so clearly and transparently processed or administered that everyone can trust the result. Because if things drag on and on, then you have problems. You have real problems. You have, national security issues, depending on which seats are still open. You have continuity of governance issues with relations with foreign powers. You have a lot of issues if you can't get those seats filled in a timely fashion. So it's a problem. And so when the elections go to court, what happens often, and this just happened again in North Carolina in 2024, is the judges are like, well, we're not the ones who are supposed to choose the representatives, the people are. So they try to shortcut a valid process. This is what happened in North Carolina. A judge arbitrarily decided. So here's the deal. The North Carolina state legislature, under the Constitution, gets to determine what the rules are for qualifying to be a voter in that state. They decided that you have to present a social security number or a driver's license. The Board of Elections in North Carolina made a bipartisan law. They violated the principle that the legislature set, and they said, well, that applies for everybody except overseas voters. We're not going to apply the law for overseas voters. And because Republican and Democrat members of the Board of Elections agree, we're just going to go ahead and implement that bogus policy. They have absolutely no authority to set the law. So then they did that. They didn't collect identity, verification on 60,000 voters. Then the guy who apparently lost this election by like 600 votes brought the whole thing into court. And the federal judge says, well, it's too late now to change the rules. So we're just going to go ahead and count 60,000 votes and go ahead and disenfranchise 2.7 million citizens in North Carolina who followed the law and had their votes diluted. This is the kind of crazy stuff that judges believe they have the right to do, and frankly, election officials believe they have the right to do.
Have you been pleased by what the Supreme Court's been doing lately, and that's trying to curtail the authority of federal district judges and other judges to where they're not authorized to make rulings that have national impact? Is that a good thing?
I do think it's a good thing generally, although there are circumstances in which injunctions are appropriate, but not national. I do think that that whole cycle of judicial opportunism, you could call it, or judicial activism that began really in the civil rights era, it's right to close that down. The decision that the Supreme Court has really floored me with was in 2024 in the spring, the Jarkissi ruling and the Loper-Bright ruling, where they basically overturned this doctrine called Chevron that said the people who administrate elections or other functions in government, as long as they substantially comply in their application of policy, then we're just going to trust them. So under that doctrine, the North Carolina Board of Elections would actually be allowed to write law, which is crazy. How are we supposed to maintain life, liberty, and property if we ignore the boundaries set by our brilliant founders?
That leads me into my next question, where something you just said. The argument's made sometimes depending on what ideology dominates the Supreme Court. Some will try to interpret law based on the Constitution. Others will try to write new law depending on their sensibilities. Is there one way? I guess I should say, how do you think justices on the Supreme Court should be performing? Which way?
I can't speak to that broadly. What I can say is that USA is very hopeful of getting a fair equity ruling in front of the Supreme Court on our lawsuits. And we are filing a motion in Colorado upcoming on Monday, July 21st. And we're hoping to get that in front of the Supreme Court ultimately if we don't get a favorable ruling in district court, because I think it's a very obvious and reasonable principle to say that in the administration of an election, the voters have to be authentic, the votes have to be authentic, the counts have to be provable, and they have to reconcile. You can't have more votes counted than you have voters who cast votes. And you have to have proof. The election officials in this beautiful country, they have to prove it to the American people. So I would like to see the Supreme Court take up this simple logical cause and say that's true. Because if we don't do that, then what in the heck is the point of having elections at all? And how will we ever have, that beautiful blessing of domestic tranquility if no one can trust election outcomes?
Okay, we'll be back to wrap up this week's edition of Talk of the Tiers in 2 minutes. Please stick around. Welcome back to Talk of the Tiers. Marley, I'm just going to jump right back into it. I want to read something else off your website. We are an organization of citizen volunteers working to ensure valid constitutional elections that are fair, accurate, and trustworthy. We also seek to hold citizens, politicians, and officials responsible for obeying our election laws. You don't have written in there anywhere, we're going to make Republicans responsible, we're going to make Democrats responsible, we're going to make Libertarians responsible. You want everybody responsible. So why would anybody push back against that? Seems pretty straightforward.
It does seem pretty straightforward. I think the only real issue that comes up when we present our reports to election officials, when we bring suspicious activity reports to the FBI and the DOJ, to U.S. attorneys and the like, the question comes up, well, how did you guys get these numbers? So we explain, well, we simply requested a copy of the official registration list and official voter participation history directly from their custodian at the state level, the chief election official. and we ran some queries to just pull out records that we had a feeling might be in there that might not really comply with the law, or just flat out don't comply with the law. Let's be honest. So, that's the question that comes up. And it is a labor of love. We love our country, and it is a tremendous amount of work, and it takes specific skills to run these queries. And it's not, not everybody can repeat them. So that's why we publish also on our website, we publish our credentials and the bio of our data team generally, and the skills and the incredible abilities and credentials that our team has doing this work. And, interestingly, James, I want to make one other point, which is in 2016, the president appointed an election integrity commission. It lasted for several months into 2017. And the first thing that commission tried to do was gather these voter roll lists from all the different states and start to investigate the accuracy and compliance of their registration records, and start to investigate them for suspicious either false registration or non-citizen registration. And they were thwarted. Actually, members of the commission filed lawsuits against the commission. It was so partisan and bitter. So what I want to point out is that Unite for Freedom now has actually done that work. We have actually requested the voter rolls from over 30 U.S. states. We have audited them, and we have produced measured, extracted outcomes of how many records are non-compliant, how many records appear to be from non-citizens or non-entities, and how many votes were counted from those individuals fraudulently and certified that way. And so the real threat here, and we just have to be honest about it, is if we keep taking the election officials' word for it, we can lose our country. This could be foreign interference. It could be a lot of different things. And when this stuff happens, it is supposed to be investigated by the FBI. That's what we're pushing for every day, and we definitely expect to see it with this administration.
Do you think that people should be able to show up at the polls on election day, they have not registered, and be able to vote right there on time, or at that time?
I have two thoughts on that. My personal opinion is that makes it really, really difficult on the election officials to avoid counting fraudulent votes. But if the state legislatures want to do it that way, technically it is their privilege. The other issue, though, that I do want to bring up is that when people are allowed to register and vote on election day, it deprives the other citizens of the right to contest a registrant, because there is no time to do so. And historically, that has not been tolerated, because the accuracy of the registration list is so paramount to conducting a reasonable and legally valid election that no one in their right mind would think of allowing someone to get on that list, minutes before
Marlene,
voting. It's just
Thank
not
you very
possible.
much. I appreciate it. Hope we can get back with you again. Thanks for watching, everybody. Appreciate it.